Welcome to this episode of Turning Grief into Growth, the Journey of Transformation. This is a podcast that's hosted by Greg Jacobs and Don Lipstein. Well, good morning, Don. Welcome, everybody, to the Turning Grief into Growth, the Journey of Transformation podcast. We're just two dads on this journey trying to figure out life together in the loss of our two sons. And our hope is that you'll journey alongside us and that we will grow together in this time. So, Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Good morning to you, Greg, and good morning to our listeners as well. And when I say morning, I spelled MOURNING. Good morning.
Yes.
And that's what we hope to be doing here.
Good morning. I like that. It's a good play on words. How true that is. Well, today we are going to have a topic of triggers in grief. And Don, you and I have been talking about how sometimes the word trigger can also be a trigger. So we want to call that out as well, whether there was gun violence, suicide, murder, killed in line of duty, things like that. So Don, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. You know, it didn't ever really bother me, the word trigger, until somebody that I was talking to said they got triggered by that word. So I there's been a lot of discussion about this in the professional world and clinical world, and um, basically what we're talking about when we say triggered is that we're activating emotions. So emotions get activated by an event that may occur, and that so instead of triggered, we have are trying to change that to activation of emotions or activate emotions, which makes a lot of sense to me, because the last thing we want to do is make it harder for someone else to, go through their grief journey, right?
Absolutely.
That's what we don't want to do.
So I think for the purposes of this podcast, we agreed that we're going to be using both terms. We wanted to lay out that disclaimer because we do want to be sensitive to those that might be triggered by the word trigger. We also know that it is widely used out there as a terminology in the world as far as when it comes to grief and certain things that might trip you up. Let's just say that. And I just thought we would just kind of discuss some things in life that might have been an activation of emotions or trigger for us. And I'll go ahead and start off. I think in
Yeah.
2023, I was taking my grandson, who's coming up on 8 years old. He'll be 8 in April. It's crazy. He was my grandson from my son who passed away, David, in 2020. And I was taking him to the state fair here in Kentucky, and it was this big, huge open room. It was indoors, and they had all these booths set up as all state fairs do. And I remember the military and the state police were represented there. And I look over to my one side and I see a military army recruitment booth and a bunch of people in uniform manning it and walking around. And then I see off to the side two big trailers. One had a mangled up car on it that they were trying to promote safe driving and talk against drunk driving accidents. And then the other trailer had a state police helicopter on it. And those three things, in and of themselves, Don, if you think about it, if you're an outsider listening and don't know my story, you're like, well, that's pretty cool. That's a nice, promotional thing for the military and for the state police, and who doesn't want to speak out against drunk driving and things like that. What if you don't know me, what you don't realize is my son served in the Army. He died while serving in the Army in an auto accident. He was intoxicated whenever he died in the auto accident. His car was hit by a 75-year-old woman entering the interstate 50 minutes after getting off work. Excuse me. And flipped him into a light pole when she sideswiped him, didn't see him. and his car was mangled and crushed. And the other aspect of that is my son worked on helicopters in the military, worked on AH-64s. He was a 15 Yankee by job, MOS, and he worked on the aviation, electronics, and armament of Apache helicopters. So those three items in and of themselves triggered me. I was holding my grandson's hand and I didn't know what to do. I was like, what in the world is going on? What should I do? I froze and I thought, I can't freak out here in the middle of the state fair with my grandson. He didn't understand. It wasn't something that he was triggered by, but it activated my emotions to the point where he was pulling my hand, trying to go see the helicopter, trying to see the car, trying to see the recruitment booth. And I was at a quandary like, what do I do? How do I handle this? What do I do now? So how do you handle that, Don? I'll tell you in a minute how I handled it, but what are your thoughts?
And let's save that for um, as because we're going to get into the how to handle
Yeah,
triggers and what we did to help us. So I don't want to talk about your trigger as much as maybe what has activated my
yeah,
emotions in the past. And so for me, my son, just like Greg's son, served in the military. He was Navy, and I remember uh, we were on my children and I were at the airport. We were on a flight to Dallas for part of his memorial service, and I saw all these people that in the airport, and I'm like sitting there wondering, are, have they lost somebody too? Like, are they grieving somebody? Um, and then I looked and saw somebody in a military uniform. In fact, he was Navy, and I just about crumbled. Like it was debilitating for me. And tears came to my eyes. My kids were asking what's wrong, and I'm like, there's somebody that's flying with us in a Navy uniform. So um, there, there's that, and think about when my mom died, and this is many many years ago. The triggers that occurred or the emotions getting activated. Um, it was just somebody cooking and smelling the food that she would make and the
mm,
smells that I would just be like, oh my God, I really miss my mom. And so you know these things are going to occur. That's part of grief. There's no question that if you experience it, uh, I just want you to know you're not crazy. It's normal. It's natural. So, and then some people might not get activated at all, and that's okay too. Um, there's nothing right or wrong. There's no right or wrong way to deal with your grief. It's just um, but if you do have emotions that are coming up, I think it's important that we figure out what to do with them instead of pushing them down. When we push them down, that's when stress and other things can cause all kinds of problems for our bodies, um, and our mind too. Uh, so uh, let those emotions out as they come. So let's go back to how you handled that, Greg, and then we'll talk about how I was able to manage my uh, my emotions.
it was a test. I was testing you to see if you jump into answering that right off the bat. No, yeah, I think I want to come back to that in a minute too. I think that there's several things that you said that I kind of want to drill down on. You were talking about the smell of cooking, even. I remember going through the Kroger aisle at the grocery store and seeing a can of corned beef hash. And I thought, could it be? And I went ahead and bought it and I took it home and I put it in a skillet. My wife and kids were like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I bought this can of corned beef hash." And they're like, "Why?" I mean, it's chock full of sodium and preservatives. And I'm like, "Because just stay tuned." And the pan started sizzling and heating up, and it was amazing. It took me back to my childhood, where my grandpa every Sunday would cook corned beef hash for my brother and I, and I had all of these fond memories flood back. So it's amazing how our brain works when it comes to activating emotions. Not all of them are positive. That in that case, it was. I had a feeling it would be a positive, and I wanted to test it to see if it did, and it did. It came true. But a lot of them are negatives. And we're going to take pretty much the last half of this podcast, I think, to really address how we handled those things and the growth that come out of that if you allow it, because I think that there's a lot of people that don't allow growth because it's too painful and they suppress it. So I do think that there is a matter of avoidance versus overcoming the fear aspect of the growth that we'll talk about. But I was thinking about just some other triggers or activations of emotions, Don. And I've
Yeah.
seen, like, my wife and I will not, she will not watch a war movie with me. And I've asked her many times, why won't you not do this? You did this before David died. And she's like, because David died in the military. And I said, but he wasn't in wartime. It didn't matter to her. It was still wearing the uniform. So I can watch them and I don't have that kind of response. She does. Is one right or wrong? No. It's a matter of the different situations.
Yeah, no, and that's so true. It's good that that you recognize that the two of you are dealing with the same issue, but it's affecting you totally differently. The last two episodes that we talked about holidays and that can be a trigger,
Yeah.
right? And it's pretty common. Every time I pass the funeral home where Josh's memorial service was. It's a trigger for me. It even to this day, I it's like I can't pass it without thinking about the fact that that's where his final memorial service was. Um, so smells can be triggers, like I mentioned with my mom's songs can be triggers,
Mm.
right? And just like you mentioned, it can be good or bad. Like songs can bring us joy when we hear it, or it can bring us some sorrow too. Photographs are big triggers. I know so many people that can't look at pictures of their loved one without falling apart. And so that's a real big um, activating emotional event. So,
You know,
and then go
it,
ahead.
I was just thinking about what you said about they could be positive or negative, kind of like I was talking about the corned beef hash.
Right.
Um, I sometimes want to get triggered. Now that's a weird
Uh,
concept, but if I really am wanting a good cry, I put on a song by Hardy, "Give Heaven Some Hell," and it just like epitomized David's life, adventuresome, aspect, and it ends with the funeral at the end, and the church bells ringing, and it just brings me back to a point where I can actually shed a tear, which I find very therapeutic and healthy for me.
yeah, no, that's a really good point. That sometimes you do want those triggers, the emotions to be activated. Let it out, right? As long as you're willing to let it out and not push it down. Um, so I'm glad you brought that up, Greg. Um, so what? what have we done to help us overcome the effects of these emotional activations?
Yeah, I think that I remember at one point in time, it was in February of 23. My wife and I were driving back from an event. It was late at night. We were on the interstate, and there was a car accident in front of us, and it had flipped over. And we were probably car number 10. And I came up on this scene, and there was a bunch of people out of the car. I froze. Wanted to be help and go to rescue, but then all of a sudden an ambulance passed me and a fire engine passed me, and they all jumped out. So I knew that he was getting the good qualified care of what happened. But I freaked out, and I quickly got over into the emergency lane, and we were just past an exit. So I threw my Tahoe in reverse. My wife's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I have got to get out of here. I got to get out of here." And I started having this panic attack, and I just floored it going in reverse up this exit ramp to get away from this situation. And I'll never forget that moment because I realized I can't be constructive in society if I'm always panicking, with things. So I thought, what am I going to do next time? And I put some thought into it. And, we're constantly passing first responders, whether it's ambulances, fire engines, police, with their sirens on. And for me, it was a major trigger. So what I do now is what everybody's supposed to do. You pull off to the side, you put your hazards on, you give the respect and the way, thoroughfare for them to go by you. And then I'll say a prayer for whoever's involved in that. Prayer for the first responders and the speed that they're going. My brother is a police officer. I know all about that. Prayer for those that they're responding to. And I found that that has been constructive where it's not a trigger for me, an activation of emotions now where I freak out, I have a panic attack, I got to get out of that situation as soon as possible. Another one is a flag. Until you've been handed a flag at a graveside, everything seems very patriotic about it. But I really struggled watching my wife and my grandson handed a flag at the graveside with being patriotic when it comes to Memorial Day or July 4th or some of these other days. Now you can't see it. It's on a different wall in my office, but I have a flag, a big, 6 foot flag hanging from my wall. And it has come, basically where I view it every single day. It's become a part of my ambiance in my office. And it hasn't been such the opposing force as it, once was.
Yeah, I have similar situation with the Navy uniformed uh, men and women that I would see that made me um, break down and just have super uh, emotions around. I I decided that I was going to stretch my comfort zone and become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I decided I was just going to walk up to everyone that I saw and shake their hand and thank them for their service.
Mhm.
And initially, it was pretty hard for me to do, but after a while, it melted away. The emotions melted away because I knew that I could handle this, that it was something that um, I had overcome, and that gave me um, the uh, the power. I empowered myself to continue to do this with other things that seem to activate my emotions. Um, I have since learned that there's a lot of ways that we can help ourselves through this, and grounding techniques, for instance, just taking, I do a 4-4-8 breathing where I breathe in for four to the count of four. I hold to the count of four, and then I release my breath to the count of eight. And I do that 3 or 4 times, and it takes me from a very heightened activation state to a much more calmer place. Um, that's, a way that you can do that. Body scans is another way. Um, so I don't know if you have other techniques that you've learned about
Yeah, I
that
think the
can be
grounding,
helpful.
yeah, the grounding is huge. Shout out to my buddy and yours, Paul Gilson, for
Oh yeah.
teaching me that with the yogatic breathing. And it was the first time he mentioned this to me and sent me some videos. I was like, "What are you talking about? This is weird." And it was really just kind of sitting in a chair with her feet firmly planted on the floor and just doing breathing exercises where it's like 4 cycles a minute where you're breathing in and out in a 15-second cycle, doing that 4 times. And I use that every single day. I'll tell you, Don, where I use it the most, which is kind of crazy. My feet aren't on the floor. I'm not grounded during this time, but I struggle with sleep apnea and I wear a CPAP at night. And for those that have sleep apnea, they know that you're doing good if you don't have more than 3 occurrences in an hour. So you still stop breathing. Your airway gets, lodged. But if it's only a couple times an hour, it's considered to be okay. Well, it's not okay when you wake up and your heart is racing and you're gasping for breath, and your heart's going boom, 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 boom. And the way that I overcome that almost every night is I'll breathe in and I'll breathe out really slow and do that 15-second cycle, excuse me. And it's amazing how quick my heart will slow down and go boom, boom, boom. And it falls back into the rhythm and the pace it should be. So I practice that a lot when it comes to my heart racing, anxiety, fear. Is I do some breathing exercises, and I'm reading a book called Breathe right now, and it kind of emphasizes that it's kind of a lost art. We take it for granted, think that we're breathing right, and a lot of times we're just doing shallow breathing. So that's a good call out. I think just some of the other triggers I wrote down is I already mentioned like war movies, accident scenes, news broadcast. If you're seeing on the news overdoses or suicides or car accidents, or a soldier stepping on an IED, whatever type of scenario it might be, a lot of those can be activation of emotions and triggers. A flag, if a flag was handed to you at a graveside with a military funeral, that can tend to be one of those. Friends getting married. I remember the first time we went to my niece's wedding, and my wife and I bawled through the whole thing. It's my niece on my wife's side, and everybody around us saw us bawling and crying, and they thought, "Oh my gosh!" They think how sweet it is. It was very sweet. Love them as can be, but it wasn't about the wedding. It wasn't about the sweetness of it. It was about my son will never go through that and get married. So there's a different perspective as mourners and grievers that we take than those that don't comprehend and empathize with that. Graduations, when you see people graduating, when you see pictures on social media, people posting pictures of their kids and the pumpkin field, or, at graduations or weddings or different life events, a lot of times you go through a trigger and an activation of emotions, mourning the fact that maybe you don't have a recent picture. It took us a while to actually have another family picture because it wasn't whole without David. We had my wife Amy and I, and my son Nathan and my daughter Hannah, but David wasn't there. So therefore, why would we take a family picture when the last one we had was in 2020? And then I also mentioned like first responder sirens and things like that. So there's a lot of different things that can trigger. It's different for everybody, as you said, but those are just a few to mention.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like traveling to a place, like you know, I know I have a client who doesn't want to go back home because it reminds her of her mom and dad who have recently died. And so, just the place, and her sister lives in this home. So it's hard for her uh, to do that. we've talked about some of the ways that she can stretch her comfort zone. Um, and, to just do it uh, one step at a time. Maybe, you know, go there for a short period and, um, step inside and be be there for 5 or 10 minutes and come on out and have a plan in place when we are when we know that we're going to be activated, right? We
Yeah.
know that we're putting ourselves in this situation, that we're stretching our comfort zone. Have some plan in place, a coping, um, someone to
Yeah.
call, some place to go that's going to bring you comfort, or something to do that will bring you some comfort. And just like we're talking about the breathing, like that right there. If you walk into a place that is like that activates your emotions, um, you can do
Yeah.
the breathing exercise right then and there, and hopefully it'll bring it down. But if not, remove yourself and try to uh, get that breath taken care of outside of wherever you are.
You mentioned remove yourself. I call it building in an escape hatch. That's my terminology.
Yeah, I
I
like
like
that.
to, yeah, I like to build an escape hatch. I like to be able to have an out.
Yeah,
Whether it's I want to drive to an event and not carpool with somebody else because if something happens, I want to be able to leave. That might be an escape
absolutely.
hatch. You know,
Yep,
there's different things, but I think there's a difference between building an escape hatch versus avoidance. At least you're trying. At least you're going for it. If it doesn't work that time, that's okay. Go ahead and back yourself out of that scenario, and maybe try again. Maybe not, in the near future, maybe in the distant future, whenever you're ready, and show yourself grace. I remember uh, one of my favorite childhood places to vacation is Ludington, Michigan. My wife, or I'm sorry, my mom has been taking me up there since the 70s, my brother and I. She's been going up there since the 40s. It's a small little fishing community. And we'd always stay on this lake called Lake Hamlin that runs into Lake Michigan. I call it the other ocean, Lake Michigan. But I remember I was out on that boat, just a little John boat with a 10 horsepower motor on 9/11 when the towers came down. And I had my son David on the boat with me. He was, 2 years old, and we were out there fishing. I guess he was 2.5 at the time. And I just caught a northern pike. I remember my wife yelling at me from the shore that there was just a terrorist attack. So I remember that just emblazoned in my memory. So I wanted to go back and feel close to David to that memory after he died. So he died in December 23rd of 2020. On 9/11 of 21, I went up to Michigan by myself. I got rented a little John boat, went out on a 10 horsepower motor, went out to the exact same spot, threw my fishing line in the water, and I got so frustrated and so overcome by anger and grief. I threw my fishing rod in the water, I threw my tackle box in the water, and I remember taking a selfie of myself, not out of vain, but I wanted to record the deep grief that this man had in his face. And occasionally I'll go back to that as just kind of a mile marker to see where I have come from. This last year, I took my whole family back. It was the first time we'd all been back in a while to Michigan. Went out there, did not have the same emotions, didn't have the same roadblocks as I did the year after he died. So I think that's growth. I think that I could have said I'll never go back to Ludington, Michigan or Hamlin Lake. But I think to overcome that, and I dropped my wife and kids off at the state park one day, and I went out by myself just to see what it was like. And I cried a little bit. I killed the motor, and I just sat there and I floated. And I got my Google Photos open, and I just looked at photos of David. And it was a very sweet moment out on that lake by myself, just looking at pictures of David. So I think that's kind of an example of growth in the midst of grief and that transformation journey.
absolutely. Anytime we can take something that is a problem for us troublesome and overcome it, that is growth, right? Um, so we're still gonna grieve, like the grief journey never really ends, but it does change and it softens, and I think the uh, triggers can make it really uh, tough um, and sharp. But if we can figure out ways to melt those triggers away, to soften it, like what you just said, and Virginia Beach is where Joshua died, and I told myself I'll never ever go back there because the only time I ever really went to Virginia Beach was to visit him, and you know, so I was like, I don't need to go back there. It's where he died. I don't need to. And then the Navy asked me to do a PSA for them in
Mm,
Virginia Beach.
of course.
Um, and so, of course, I decided that I was going to do it, and because I wanted to stretch that comfort zone. That's how I have overcome every difficult piece of my grief journey is stretching my comfort zone, making myself comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I did that, and now I can drive through Virginia Beach without an issue at all. But it at first it was a challenge for me. Um, so uh, there are things that we can do, um, and I don't know how much time we have left, Greg.
We're good.
Um, we're good. You know, I'd love to, and I don't know if there's a way for listeners to interact with us. Um, like, I'd love for them to submit some of their stories if there is a way. Can they? Can they?
They could
Have?
email us at turninggriefintogrowth@gmail.com.
Yeah. Um, is there a way that they can comment on the episodes too?
I need to check into that. I think
I
there's
I
a new
feel like
feature.
I feel like there is. I don't. He's the knowledgeable man. I'm the one that
I'm
I
the guy
just
that's trying to figure it out, flying by the seat of my pants. You know, I was thinking about what you're talking about stretching. You mentioned the word stretching. I
yes.
don't know why. I went back to Stretch Armstrong. Do you remember Stretch Armstrong in the 70s? It
I,
was a figure that you could stretch. It was like
oh yeah,
elastomeric.
yeah, 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 yeah.
And you never had a fear of it snapping. It just always a matter of whether or not the elasticity would, snap back to its original form, I think.
Right.
So I think there is a fear of if we stretch too much that we're going to snap. And what would you say, Don, to people, just trying to take that baby step of, I know that such and such is a trigger. Therefore, how do I take that baby step and overcome the fear that it's going to snap me and I'm going to be all overcome with major grief?
Well, if it were me, whatever it is, I would just dip my toe in. All right, dip my toe into it um and pull it out. And when the water's too cold, too hot, whichever it is, um, let it warm up a little bit. Um, so there's that, and you know that is stretching. So it's like a rubber band, right? Or even a balloon. Try to imagine a balloon. You're blowing it up. The first time you blow it up, it's really hard to blow that up, right? And yet, if you just blow it up a little bit and then let the air out, the next time you go to blow it up, you blow it up a little bit more and you let the air out, and it becomes easier and easier to blow up. It's at elasticity,
Yeah.
it stretches, and our our minds are a lot like that. We there's this study on neuroplasticity, I'm not an expert at all on any of this, but I've been learning about it. And it's basically the way I see it, it's stretching our comfort zone. And um, and we have to change the way we think about things. And we do that little by little. It's not going to happen overnight. Um, and so, uh, like you asked, how do people do that? Just take it little step at a time until you feel comfortable. Take a bigger step, and then you take another
Yeah.
bigger step. Um, photos I know are a big, big uh, activation of emotions for people. And um, some people, they just can't bring themselves to look at it. But maybe if you ask somebody who is like that, can I see a picture? You don't have to look at it. Can I see a picture of them? It it's just a way of helping people to melt their emotions away.
Yeah.
And the emotions are going to be there. It's just that they're going to be able to feel better about uh, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and uh, so
You know,
anyway,
and
I'm
and
going
Don,
on.
what works for one person might not work for another. For example,
Absolutely.
somebody had mentioned to me recently about the AI software where you can upload a picture of your loved one and it'll animate it and bring it to life where they're smiling or looking around, blinking. And the person I was speaking with said, "Isn't that so creepy? I can't believe that can't be healthy for that person." And to that, I would say, you know what? It didn't work
To
for
each his
me.
own.
I did try it. To each his own. And if that is how they have to cope right now,
Yep.
then that's okay. I go back. I was just thinking about a near close dear friend of mine, Kevin Burke, who passed away with COVID back in 2020. And I remember Kevin telling me one time, just to give him credit, he was talking about how we're a sticky note society. We talk about enabling a lot when it comes to another party involved, whether it's enabling somebody with alcoholism or different things. But then we don't really look at ourselves, that sometimes we enable ourselves. And one of those ways, I think, as a sticky note society, is we don't exercise that neuroplasticity where we're really stretching our brains. We're trying to grow in the sticky note, scenario, taking less sticky notes off of the refrigerator, trying to mentally remember, okay, I have a haircut Wednesday at 10:30. I've got to go to the grocery before, the Thanksgiving meal and get the turkey, whatever it might be. So I think there is an aspect of we almost have to reprogram ourselves in today's society to grow. Because we have gotten so dependent on whether it is, technology or dependent on the avoidance of growth because it's less painful. I was talking to a buddy recently, and he's like, "Man, I listened to your first podcast, and it really made me aware that maybe I have a lot more growth to go when it comes to my grief journey." And we talked about, inactive grief or unaddressed grief. And, the question came up with how far are you willing to go? How much unaddressed grief are you willing to tackle in order to move forward? Because it's less painful, it appears, by not addressing it. But I think in the long haul, it catches up with you. So I like what you said about dip your toes in the water and baby steps, because I think that's really kind of where you have to start.
Yeah. No question. And you're right. Uh, to each his own. There's what works for you and me. It may not work for someone else. But the thing is, try something,
Yeah.
right? Um, you know, I tried something and it worked for me. And when I saw that it worked for me, I kept doing it to help me melt away other emotions that activated me. Um, but that, you know, just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for everybody. So find something, try it, and if it doesn't work, try something else. It's, you know, we don't have to stick with whatever, you know, it, we
Yeah.
can do whatever we feel most comfortable doing.
What's the
Um,
old saying? If it doesn't work, try again.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and that's so true with grief, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing more truer than that.
I don't know if you can use the word success in grief. I think you can use the word progressing forward, because I think sometimes you can feel like it's two steps forward, one step back, and that's okay. But I think that there is a matter of moving forward. And you mentioned Virginia Beach. Amy and I love Colorado. You know, we live in Kentucky. We took a family vacation out there. We've been out there several times by ourselves. But since David died out there outside Fort Carson, we haven't been able to go back. And it hasn't presented itself to go back, and it hasn't been a big push proactively to go back either. I know one day we will. And we've mentioned that, hey, if one of us is ready and the other's not, let's try to be sensitive to that, make sure we're both on the same page and communicating about it along the way, which I think is important. But it's also not one of those things that's going to make or break us right now. It's not a huge aspect of my grief journey that I have to push on in order to do. So I do think that there are some of those things that are like daily occurrence things that you come across that you have to work through. And then there's some other things that are maybe in the macro perspective versus the micro that maybe aren't something you have to see the forest from the trees at this point.
Yeah, um, good good point that you brought up. Uh, you know, especially if you have a partner or and children involved as well. Um, that just make sure you're both on the same page, um, and that you are considering, you know, other grievers if in fact, you know, it involves them. Um, I mean, in my case, I was invited down by myself, so I didn't need to consider anyone else at that time. But if you're going out to Colorado, I can see where you would want, you know, Amy to be part of that
Yeah.
equation as to whether you can or should do it.
Yeah, I don't feel like I could go by myself. She doesn't feel like she can go without me. I think it's going to be a joint effort, for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I think on a future podcast, we'll talk about just the different aspects in nuclear families as far as the different types of loss and the different experiences from, the different relatives around you and how they cope and how they deal with things differently. Because I know that I've talked to a lot of people that feel almost shunned or put out that direct family members are not feeling the same way that they do. So that's a different dichotomy for a different podcast, I think, in the future.
Yeah.
Well, Don, I think we're coming kind of to time here. Any last points that you would like to just kind of drill down on when it comes to triggers or an activation of emotions?
It's natural, as I said earlier, to have those emotions activated. So be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself when it happens. And if you, you know, have a moment where, you know, you just feel like you've lost control, that's okay too. Like don't beat yourself up. Um, that if there's anything that I could say, um, just be gentle with yourselves, um, be kind, be, you know, as compassionate with yourself as you would with someone else that may be going through the same situation. Um, if you can think along those lines, uh, it can help you a lot.
Yeah. I think I'll leave us with this thought. Um, I think that triggers or activation of emotions can have a connotation of negativity. And I think we've spelled out a little bit on this podcast today that that's not necessarily the case. Probably more emphasis is put towards the negative aspect of triggers and therefore the grief that comes from that and how you can have growth to overcome some of those triggers. I would say that there are some triggers and activations of your emotion that really are positive. I've heard people that have lost parents, for example, where they hear a song come on the radio, or they're driving by a certain barbecue joint, and they're like, "Man, that really reminds me of my dad taking me in there and having barbecue," or whatever it might be. So there are certain activations that are definitely positive that I think that we should mention. It's not necessarily that you're a freak of nature or something's wrong with you, like you said. One, if you desire those positive emotions, that's a good thing. But I
Yeah.
think for those that are negative, I think that it is something that take a mental inventory, look at what might be taking you down a rabbit hole, that maybe you do dip your toes in the water, as Don said, and just as you mentioned with the elasticity of the balloon, that you just kind of take a little step at a time into addressing those things and seeking healing and growth in this journey of transformation that you're on.
Love that you ended with a positive note there, Greg.
Absolutely. Well, folks, until next time, I appreciate everybody dialing in today. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen. We hope turning grief into growth spoke to your heart and becomes a part of your own journey of healing and transformation. If you know someone who could use a little hope, please share this episode with them. And don't forget to follow, like, or subscribe on your favorite platform so you don't miss what's coming next. Don and I can't wait to share more conversations to help you keep turning your grief into growth. Until next time.